Multiplying and dividing integers. By the end of this video, you will be able to multiply or divide integers and apply the order of operations to evaluate expressions that involve both the multiplication and division of integers. In other words, our first focus will be on learning and then applying a new rule that will help us determine whether the sign of our quotient or product is positive or negative. We will then continue to practice this rule with expressions that involve both multiplication and division. So, how do we multiply and divide integers? Well, step one, we're going to ignore the negatives and multiply or divide left to right as we normally would. Step two, we're going to ask ourselves, how many negatives are we multiplying or dividing? Step three, if we have an odd amount of negatives, our answer is negative. But if we have an even amount of negatives, our answer is positive. To remember this, we can think of the acronym ONEP. An odd amount of negatives means that our answer is negative. An even amount of negatives means that our answer is positive. Alright, let's try out a few examples here. Example 1 says negative 6 divided by 2. So our first step is to ignore the negatives and just ask ourselves, what is 6 divided by 2? 3. And after that we want to say, how many negatives were within our expression? Well, we only have one negative, and 1 is an odd number, so we have an odd amount of negatives. And since we have an odd amount of negatives, our final answer is going to be negative 3. Alright, so let's look at example 2 here. Example 2 says negative 3 inside parentheses squared. Whatever is inside the parentheses, when we square that, we want to multiply it by itself. So negative 3 squared expanded is really negative 3 multiplied by negative 3. Now again, in step 1, we want to ignore the negatives temporarily and just say, what is 3 multiplied by 3? The answer to that is 9. Now in step 2, when we count how many negatives, we want to be very careful when we have an exponent involved. When looking at the original expression, it may appear that we only have one negative. However, the exponent is telling us that 2 negatives will show up. And now 2 is an even number. So when we have an even number of negatives, our final answer is positive. So negative 3 in parentheses squared is equal to positive 9. I would now like you to pause the video and try problems 1 through 4 of the guided practice. Alright, let's look at this together. So for problem number 1, we have 25 divided by 5. Now, before 7th grade, you've solved problems like this, so there's no need to apply our rule. We know the answer is 5. But if we were to apply the rule, we have 0 negatives and 0 is an even number. Therefore, our answer is positive. Now in problem number 2, we have 5 multiplied by negative 5. Well, 5 times 5, that's 25. And we only have one negative in our expression. And 1 is an odd number. So since we have an odd number of negatives, our product is negative 25. For problem number 3, we have what's inside the parentheses squared. So we have negative 5 multiplied by negative 5. 5 multiplied by 5 is 25. We have 2 negatives, and 2 is an even number. So since we have an even amount of negatives, our answer is positive 25. For problem number 4, we have the fraction negative 16 over negative 4. Now we know that a fraction represents division, so we could say negative 16 divided by negative 4. So 16 divided by 4 is 4, and we have 2 negatives. That's an even amount of negatives, which means that our answer, our quotient, is going to be positive 4. For number 5, we have negative 4 multiplied by 0. But what's anything multiplied by 0? 0, right? So we don't need to count the negatives because we know the answer is 0, and 0 is neither positive nor negative. So for number 6, we have 4 divided by 0. Now, we are not allowed to divide by 0. If you were to enter into your calculator a number divided by 0, your calculator would give you an error. So the answer to 4 divided by 0 simply does not exist. Alright, let's now summarize some of the key points. When multiplying or dividing integers, an odd amount of negatives means our answer is negative, while an even amount of negatives means our answer is positive. We can use the acronym ONEP to remember this. A fraction is another way of representing division. The expression b in parentheses squared is equivalent to b multiplied by b, where b may be a positive or negative integer. Any integer multiplied by 0 is 0. Any integer divided by 0, on the other hand, is not allowed. Now that we covered some key points, let's continue with problems 7 and 9 from the independent practice section. For problem 7, we have -6 divided by -3 multiplied by -2. Now the first thing we want to do is to think of this problem without any negatives. Now, when there is multiplication and division within the same expression, we want to perform those operations from left to right. So first, we're going to do 6 divided by 3 to give us 2, and then we have 2 multiplied by 2, which gives us 4. So now if we look back at our original expression, we have 3 negatives, and 3 is an odd number. So since we have an odd number of negatives, that means that our solution is going to be -4. For number 9, we have -1 inside parentheses raised to the 248th power. We know that that exponent is telling us that -1 is being multiplied by itself 248 times. And 248 is even, which means that we'll have an even amount of negatives. And if we have an even amount of negatives, we know that our answer is +1. I would now like for you to try problems 1, 4, 12, and 14 of the same independent practice section. Also, please make sure to submit your answers on Google Forms to receive full credit on your homework and also to receive immediate feedback. Thanks for watching and have a nice night.